I'm only a questionnaire. Only a questionnaire. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Blue Boar Tavern again. Another adventurous night here. Brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. Just go to your usual tables, settle in. We've got a different kind of night for you tonight. I should add, if you're not live tonight, but you're watching us from the future through the wonders of the YouTube machine, hit like and subscribe for us. That really helps out. And in fact, I've got to tell everyone here, we're sort of boggled at how well business is going at the Blue Boar Tavern here. Our gatherings have tended to have over 100 people here. And when we do put up our futuristic recordings on the YouTube machine, our last episode got 1,000 views on the first day. So we're doing so well, I think I'm going to have to expand the place here, build some new wings and new rooms. In fact, I'm going to build the Edward de Vere birth room up there, a new room, and then I'll plant his mulberry tree in back as well. Bonner, hi, Bonner.
Hi, everybody.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Well, I'm just telling everyone how well the Blue Boar Tavern's doing, and I attribute that in part to you, all of us, of course. But I know our plan tonight, folks, is something different. We're being more kind of freewheeling tonight and improvisatory because we often get frustrated as the Blue Boar Tavern's gotten bigger and bigger, and we get more people. We just can't take questions as easily or integrate it into our flow of our conversation. So we just decided to celebrate the holiday season and celebrate Oxfordians because certain other people sure aren't. We're just going to have an open question and answer tonight. People can ask us questions, throw us questions. We can go, gee, I don't know. So we're making it up as we go. So I need to remind everyone, at your table there, you've got a question and answer button. Submit your questions through there. Not through the chat, because that's where you can say things to yourselves and talk among yourselves as usual. There's Dorothea, and our special friend Alex has joined us.
Hey.
And somebody's missing. Who's missing?
Where's Phoebe?
Phoebe. Have you heard anything, Dorothea?
I'm afraid I have. Phoebe sent me a text saying that she is really feeling unwell today, and she did not want to come and cough and sneeze on the rest of us, and we're going to miss her very much, but next time.
Definitely, and I'm getting over something myself, so I can understand that. But here's this other fellow that I just found in the alley out back, and I said, we need somebody quickly, so I grabbed this guy, and no, I'm kidding. Alex McNeil, it's an honor to have you join us at our table here.
So I guess I don't need my mask tonight?
I think we're protected by certain barriers here.
All right. Plus alcohol.
Yeah. And for folks who don't know, if you haven't seen it, check out Alex's Shakespeare Authorship 101 video on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship YouTube channel. I watched it today. And I have to say, Alex, and this is going to sound bad, but it's meant as a compliment. I think what really makes it work is how you're not clever. And I mean that in the best possible way. You present it so sincerely and straightforwardly. I can tell it's getting tons of views. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's boiled down from when I originally gave the grandfather of those talks about 12 years ago or more, it was 70 minutes. And then I had to cut it down for other reasons. And then finally, we decided to cut it down to a 30-minute format. And it was painful to do the cuts, but it was absolutely worthwhile.
What bit the dust, Alex? What did you take out?
A lot more of parallels between events in the plays and events in Oxford's life. A lot of that got cut out. Also, I didn't get into any of I don't think I discussed the sonnets at all, or more than a brief mention of them in the 30-minute talk. I discussed them a little more in the longer versions.
So, Alex, in all your years editing the newsletter, which is the other incredible service you do to the SOF, and you are retiring from that. We will miss you very much there. You're not retiring from the SOF just from editing the newsletter. What have been some of your favorite articles that you've published in that decade?
Well, first, let me say I'm not completely retiring from the newsletter. I'm just not going to be the editor-in-chief anymore. I hope to continue to have some involvement with the newsletter. I enjoy the editorial process. So it's just, but I thought after 10 years, it's time for somebody else to really head it up. Anyway, your question, I did have a chance to look over, thanks to the SOF's archives, the vast amount of stuff we have online, and all the issues of the newsletter are available free to anybody on the SOF website. But I looked over my 10 years and I thought actually there's quite a bit of good stuff. And I went going back the farthest, perhaps, the spring of 2014, which would have been the second issue that I edited. There's a really interesting article that the Folger Library had. They had a seminar in early 2014 on the problem of Shakespeare biography. And several of our members were able to go in. They didn't sneak in, they were actually able to get in. But it was very interesting to see the leading biographers, the Greenblatts and the Shapiros and the Gail Kern pastors dancing around the issue of, how do we reconstruct the life of this person that actually we know very, very little about? And what kind of problems does that cause? And it's just, you can see how they're operating from a completely different perspective. So I thought that was interesting.
I was there with you.
Oh, okay.
I was there, yeah.
You were there. So
I was there, yeah. I listened to the whole thing, all days, yep.
That's in the spring 2014 issue. In the summer 2015 issue, another one that you might, as I said in my introduction to it, you'll either throw the issue down on the floor or you'll laugh, because it's called An Hour with Wells and Edmondson, that Don Rubin and Patricia Keeney were able to get an hour's interview with Stanley Wells and Paul Edmondson when those two came to Canada. And again, it's just amazing to see firsthand almost, the completely different perspective that they're operating under. And again, I thought that was fascinating. Moving ahead a little bit, and it's just coincidence that Bonner's here. I thought Bonner's article in the winter 2020 issue, The Persistent Mystery of Oxford's Annuity. It's a fascinating article on the details of the 1586 £1,000 grant to Oxford that was made, and it's certainly, you can't come to any other conclusion than that it was a matter of state, that it did not have to do with just helping out some impoverished earl who was in embarrassment, who was in financially embarrassing circumstances. That's just too superficial an exclamation. And then finally, the fall 2021, 2 years ago, fall 2021, there's a multi-page spread. I canvassed a bunch of leading Oxfordians on what are their favorite books. And so it's a several page spread where I think I got a dozen people to recommend their favorites. And I didn't put a limit on how many books you could put in your list. So there's all kinds of interesting titles there. Some that everybody agrees on, like Looney's Shakespeare Identified. Others that only one or two people put up because they're aimed at special areas of the times. But nevertheless, people who haven't seen it, again, it's the fall 2021 issue. You might find some interesting book titles that you'd be interested in ordering for yourself.
Thanks. That was great.
Speaking of book titles, we were talking as we were walking together into the tavern, Dorothea and I, and she just has her hands on a new book. I don't know if it's a new book. I have not run across it.
It's not. It's
something.
Literally, we're just chatting about this. It's a book on the Cook sisters. Really remarkable women, 5 of them. Although we mostly see an Oxford story, only 3, Mildred, Anne, and Elizabeth. But it talks a great deal about their education. And what Bonner and I were talking about is how dangerous letter writing was in these times, and how your letters were subject to being read, falling into the wrong hands, being taken and rewritten and changing what you wrote. And so I was reading a passage where Anne Cook Bacon, who is the second of the five sisters, she writes a letter to her son, Anthony Bacon, and she's being very catty about a member of the court, the Count of Warwick, who is a gentlewoman of the Privy Chamber and extremely close to the Queen. And she warns him to be aware that this woman is very duplicitous. And she chooses to write the letter in Latin, but she also would write him and his brother letters in Greek, because the ability of most people to read them was null. And that, brought up in my mind the letters that we have, with the exception of one when he was a youngster, but the letters we have from the Cecil, Robert Cecil, and from William Cecil that Oxford wrote to them were in italic hand instead of secretary hand. So he wrote them in italic hand, and he wrote them in English, and yet he could have written them in French, in Italian, in Greek, or in Latin if he had wanted the message to be more obscure, but he didn't. So, what is it about those letters? Was he trying to preserve what was in them, knowing the Cecils would file them very carefully and keep them? So
we have a question here related to letters and things being filed away. So shall I just leap in with
jump in? Let's see.
It occurs to me too, just now, people may be wondering, where's Brian Wildenthal? Brian he's fine. Don't worry. But like Bonner, life has overwhelmed him temporarily, and he needs to focus on other life demand things. And he's looking forward to coming back to us when that's done. So I know we make it look effortless to sit here and consume beverages and talk about Edward de Vere, but it takes more of a life commitment than it might look. So that's where Brian is. He sends his good wishes. Question from Stan. Do any of you know whether the legendary Vatican archives have ever been searched for material relevant to the Shakespeare Oxford question? Not for original manuscripts, certainly, but perhaps for correspondence from contemporaries stating, for example, I had tea with Edward de Vere Oxford today. His Lear play's coming along nicely. Anything. I'll just start, because what that reminds me of is I spent an afternoon with Charlton Ogburn, I think in 1994, I think, 5, and in his house. And he said the one thing he really wished would happen would somebody would go into the Vatican archives, because he said they had spies everywhere. And I don't know if that's ever happened, so I don't know how to answer that. Anyone else?
Michael Delahoyne has just, maybe he put it out in the chat, which we're not looking at, but he said he did go to the Vatican archives and he didn't find anything.
He says I was there.
So I'm also, and I know we were talking, I was emailing with Michael that a Jesuit priest who was trained at the Vatican archives was Father Francis Edwards. He was leading Jesuit in England about the way that the English government went after and persecuted the Jesuit priests called missionaries who were coming in from the continent into England. And that was one of his real spheres of influence, of knowledge. But he was trained at the Vatican archives. And so he would have, and he was looking for things. And I don't know that he ever came up with anything specific there. If he did, it's in his tome on the Jesuits in England. But if there were anything that could really be additive to what we know, then I don't really think we have anything out of the Vatican archives for that reason. But it's still worth asking the question. And maybe we weren't searching in exactly the right place. And that's something that Michael would know. In Rome, the English school was a center for the English. Milton was there, but earlier, well, I'm missing out on what you're saying, some of it, Michael, but appreciate your comments.
I think actually, I can't speak to the Vatican archives, but certainly the French and in particular the Spanish ambassadors are an endless source of fascinating court detail. Of course, you can't always believe them, and a lot may be put out as subterfuge by the English for those reports. But you do find out absolutely wonderful details. Even the smallest thing about Queen Elizabeth's toothache, is something that the Spanish ambassador feels he needs to return information to Philip as these machinations are going on about, Don Juan being in the Netherlands, is he going to launch an attack on England? So I find those fascinating reading.
Well, it also raises the larger point of there's still unexplored archives all over the place.
Yes.
Is it Michael Cecil? Is he the descendant who was living in the U.S. for a while? I thought he said recently there's vast quantities of stuff in the Cecil archives in England that has not even been accessed yet. It is not indexed, that is there for someone, if they can get access, to look at. Also reminded me of another article that was in the newsletter maybe 8 years ago. Some researcher found in a salt mine that's been converted into a storage archive of documents, he found several documents about John Shakespeare that had never come to light before. And these were in a public archive that's in an abandoned salt mine somewhere in England.
We've got Earl commenting here, Earl Showerman. The Venetian Inquisition archives are quite valuable for the Oxfordian case, he says. The court interviewed Orazio Guaco on his return from England, and the ecclesiastical court records of the trial of Gaspar Ribeiro has been identified as a source for Shylock. Oxford would have known Ribeiro because they both attended the same church, Santa Maria Formosa. Yeah, there must be stuff out there. That's what's frustrating is, something's out there, and you just have to find the right thing in the right place, I guess. But at least we haven't dried up all our records like Stratfordians, and we still have vast prospects ahead of us.
Well, as I recall, the American couple, the Wallaces, Charles Wallace and his wife, in the early part of the 20th century, went to the PRO, Public Record Office, as a lot of collections were gathering there at that time frame, and along with the great researcher Charlotte Carmichael Stopes, known as the indefatigable Mrs. Stopes.
Oh, yeah.
They went through millions of documents that were there. They were doing a little competition to see who could get to this collection first and that, but they found practically nothing. The only thing that really turned up about Mr. Shakespeare, of course, they were once again they were looking in the wrong place. They were looking for the wrong person, but. And you're not going to find a treasure if you're not digging in the right place. But they did find the deposition that Mr. Shakespeare of Stratford made in 1612, and that had his earliest signature of the 6 signatures that we have.
Yeah, the Beloit Mountjoy affidavit, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, which was, I think, isn't that the last scrap that's been found connected to Will Shakespeare?
Yep. And that was, I can't remember the exact date, just say around 1910, something like that.
Over 100 years ago is the last.
Definitely over a century.
Here's a question from Cheryl Egan Donovan, our esteemed filmmaker. What are your predictions for 2024? I'm assuming Oxfordian related. No.
Stock market,
Yeah.
interest rates.
Well, that's a stumper. Anyone?
Predictions for 2024.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what Elizabeth Winkler's next move is going to be. She certainly made a splash with Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heresies. She does have some momentum going. I suppose one question is she going to pursue this particular area, the Shakespeare authorship question, or since she's an investigative journalist, is she going to find something else that she finds interesting to write about?
Well, I would certainly love to say that 2024 will be the year that we break through on this and change the world. I would love to believe that. I think that concerted effort, I think there are so many outreach programs and opportunities that we and others devoted to this have going, that internal energy from those various sources, whether they're on YouTube, whether they're in print, whether they're online, whether they're film or audio or talks, that all of that adds up to a ball of energy that will move us further forward 12 months from now than we are today. If we're all still here, we can do this again in December of 2024 and see how correct we are. Bonner.
In the comments, I have to throw this out, predicts that James Shapiro will convert.
Oh, you think? Okay. All right. That's a great one.
Bonner, any predictions?
He'll convert, but unfortunately to another candidate. Yeah. So say I was wrong about Shakespeare, but it's definitely not Oxford. Yeah.
Can we turn the question around to Cheryl and ask her what her prediction is?
Yes.
If she wants to add it.
If she wants to answer.
Yeah, I'll throw in one thing. It says like a small prediction, maybe just a gut feeling I'm getting. So nothing huge, but I just have the feeling with Elizabeth Winkler's book on that subject, I have the feeling something is shifting with the public view toward the experts and authorities, meaning the usual Greenblatts and gang. And I can't pinpoint what it is exactly, but it's like people are starting to notice how hysterical they kind of are and thinking, well, there must be something to this. And it's like the stigma is kind of evaporating of doubting. So I actually did a video of myself on this. It's up on YouTube. It's called Thank You Stratfordians, if you want to look it up. And one thing I've seen is in the comments under that, I just asked them, well, if we're so lame, why do you spend so much time fighting us? That's basically it. And they have no answer to that. And I've sort of gone back and forth in the comments with some. And I say, well, why are you here? Well, they say, well, you're not important and nobody pays any attention to you and you're not a danger to us. Then I'm like, so why are you spending so much time fighting us and so much of your time and energy? Oh, because you spread this misinformation, but you say nobody's paying attention to it. So they don't know how to answer that. So I have that feeling they're more on the defensive than they have been in the past. So I hope that continues. I have a feeling something is shifting there, but I don't quite know at what rate it will or where it's going to lead. Let's see. Cheryl says, yikes, I think the opening of the Shakespeare Museum in Shoreditch will change the focus from the Globe in Stratford-on-Avon to London, and Stratfordians will revert further to the group authorship theory.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's so funny that this is coming at us a lot now, collaboration. But the interesting thing is, this man from Stratford had no literary friends. There's no record that he had any contact at all with the literary community in London. And they were a busy little group. They wrote epitaphs to each other when they were dead, and they wrote epigrams while they were living, and they wrote tributes and they dedicated stuff. And he's not connected. He's not in the picture anywhere.
Yeah, I've mentioned here before that I actually looked into the population of London, and it was like a fifth the size of Albuquerque, New Mexico now. And I can tell you every theater person in Albuquerque knows each other. So why does he not seem to have known all these other writers he's supposed to have known?
Right. But we know that Oxford knew the other writers. He mentored a good many of them. They served as secretaries. He was very
shy.
That's it. He was so gentle and reserved that he just didn't put himself forward. Here's a question from Jens in Germany. Guten Abend, Jens. Du musst sehr müde sein. Proposal for discussion. Why are we supposed to believe that the Dark Lady of the Sonnets is just one woman? Isn't it possible different sonnets refer to different women? Yeah, I mean, does it have to be one? I don't know that I've Because people argue for this person or this person or this person, but could it be?
Then I guess if that were the case, the poet would have a lot of anger and mistrust and loss of faith in multiple women. Right? Because the Dark Lady sonnets are about, I've lost faith in you, you broke your promises.
So they all seem pretty consistent toward one person.
So for me, they seem very consistently aimed at one woman. I don't know that anybody has the inside track on this. We can only react to the poetry the way it speaks to us. But it's pretty clear that there's a lot of, as I say, anger and mistrust from the poet towards the Dark Lady. And you would have to therefore assume that the poet had some truly negative, which would be an understatement, but really heartbreaking experiences with more than one person who had the power to enthrall him the way the Dark Lady enthralls the poet. And as an Oxfordian, believing that Oxford was that writer, I can't think of who else that would be. I mean, Elizabeth Cook Russell, one of those five Cook sisters, was never his favorite cup of tea, but I don't think he hated her quite that much. It's a love-hate relationship in those Dark Lady sonnets. Mm-hmm. I think that very much narrows the field. That's my response.
Also, if you think that the first 126, if you think they're addressed to one person, that is the so-called fair youth, then I think logically the next 26 would probably, that are addressed to the woman, would also be addressed to one woman, whoever you believe those people, to have been.
Any thoughts, Bonner?
I can't really speak to it with the depth that Dorothea has, because she studied the sonnets. And I'll be honest with you, I don't do close textual study. I do historical work. I regard myself as a Shakespeare historian. And so I'm not really as qualified. I read what people have to say and I take it in. But I just don't. If you ask me to interpret a Chopin nocturne, I can do that. But it's kind of a little bit out of my wheelhouse. So I'm hesitant to weigh in on it. But my sense of it is it would depend to some extent on something we will never know, which is the time frame when the sonnets were written. We know he was madly in love with Anne Vavasor, and then we know that she went off with somebody else, and he reconciles with his wife, and nobody ever really got on. They always pretended to get on well with the Queen, but the Queen was quite a handful. Mm-hmm. To manage, and she drove them nuts. She was so. I guess they all might have had some sort of they had to love her. They had to pretend to love her with the courtly love thing. And so where that fits into the picture, I don't know. But the Queen was really difficult, though eventually he did manage to get the £1,000 annuity from her, which is very strange. My punchline in one of my talks, when I talk about it, is, had she lost her mind, giving to this worthless, useless poet hanging around her court and doing absolutely nothing worthwhile, as historians that hang her on ne'er-do-well, which is what we told he was. Who wasted and spendthrifted away. Sorry for that, using that as a verb, but who completely devastated his own patrimony. And yet she's giving him all this money, and she's giving it for such a long period of time. And it's starting at the time when she isn't, what's the word I want? Crucial isn't quite good enough, but she is now knowing in 1586, that the Spanish Armada is on its way. They all knew that. William Cecil Lloyd Burleigh had his spies. And of course, it comes 2 years later. Although the year before that, they had Mary Queen of Scots, which sets it up even to be more of a dangerous time. So, and then of course, in the 1590s, they have all kinds of issues with, she's flat broke. The exchequer is bankrupt. The crops have failed. The people are starving. It's just a mess. but everybody had a tough time with Elizabeth. But then she was in a tough circumstances from the entirety of her reign. She was never she was always regarded, or she knew herself, that she had sort of an inferiority complex, which her father had. People don't really realize that, I think. But I've read it in enough places that Elizabeth, like her father before her, felt that England was regarded as this little country, this little poor, impoverished island country where people pranced around in fine clothes in the nobility, but they chopped off each other's heads all the time, which would be a pretty clear example of what they were doing. And they weren't really very well thought of in the far more cultured and cultivated countries of Italy. In fact, when Henry VIII was reaching out to find another wife after Anne Seymour died, they were trying to see if Christina of Milan would marry him. She was one of the great beauties of Europe. And she said only if she had an extra neck. So I mean, England was not well thought of. And actually, I think one of the things that Oxford was doing for her as he was molding and improving and bringing the English language forward with the Euphuist movement and other ways that he was doing, that actually he was giving her respect. She was gaining respect. And of course, he was interweaving all of these stories from Italy, Boccaccio's Decameron, Fiorentino, l'Histoire tragique, and you'd be pronouncing it right, Dorothea. I know I'm mispronouncing things terribly. But in French, and the Ovid's Metamorphoses, all the classical stuff that Earl Showerman has laid out before us, and all of these things were showing that England was a language capable of encompassing these great concepts. And she understood that. I think Elizabeth, she may have been a pretty wretched person, and she treated people around her really badly, but she was smart and she was shrewd. And that's how I see Elizabeth. Still, she was a problem to everybody who was around and about her.
There's one snide little comment that came up here in reference to grain hoarders. He says, well, failed crops are good for grain hoarders.
Oh, very good. But
I wonder who David is referring to.
Yeah, right. But riots in the streets are not so good.
Here's a question, from Earl. Where does the Blue Boar crew think the next significant breakthroughs on the Shakespeare attribution will be found? In primary documents, letters, in the defection of a highly respected scholar, on Elizabeth Winkler receiving a Pulitzer?
All of the above.
Yeah, it's kind of like Cheryl's. It's kind of like Cheryl's question. Wouldn't that be wonderful, right? That would be wonderful.
There's a related one from Tom here. This is a question for you, Alex, on your video. So again, this is, I guess, going into how we're reaching out into the world and the public here. Alex, your 101 authorship video was posted only 3 months ago, now has 10,000 views. Considering the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship membership is about 500, where is this huge viewship coming from? Are we penetrating a new customer group? Are we influencing new groups of undergraduates, graduate students? Who's watching this video in such great numbers?
Well, I looked at it 9,500 times, so maybe that's the reason that the number's so high. No, I honestly, it's a good question. I honestly don't know. Hopefully it's getting. I hope it's getting some attention from students, particularly at the secondary school level, but also maybe at the college level, who want to know just the basic nuts and bolts of what is the question all about. What are the weaknesses in the case for the traditional Shakespeare of Stratford? And if you're convinced that it's unlikely that Shakespeare is the author, who's the most likely candidate? I take a side, obviously, on this video. I didn't see the video as intended only to deconstruct the case for Shakespeare. I thought it was important to have an alternative candidate proposed also. So that's why I spent the last 60% of it on Oxford. But I'm hoping it's coming from many different sources of people who find out about it.
And the same question could apply to that. Our Blue Boar Tavern recently getting 1,000 views in one day. It's like, who are they all? I mean, it's great, but do you guys have any sense? Dorothea, do you see any
Um,
indications from the text?
well, I think
technical stuff?
uh, answering it from a search engine optimization point of view, the videos and the algorithm tend to feed off of each other. People see one video and they like it, and then the algorithm remembers that and throws up another and another and another. But it's the way that things go viral on the internet. Why does one silly TikTok where someone's dancing with their cat just take off? It's got 1 million views in a week. I mean, it strikes. Video has a way of just striking a chord with people, and that chord is one that is best hooks into something that's going on in society at the time. I think that one of our greatest challenges is to make the past relevant to people today, specifically young people, as Alex has said. I think that young people ask more questions than perhaps older generations did when they were the same age. I think they challenge, how do you know that's so? Not asking for the facts so much, but just don't patronize me and tell me you don't ask. You just are asking a silly question. Explain it to me so that I understand. And I think that's something that Alex's video does very well. And I think it's something that a lot of our videos do, which is we just explain. And we explain in a way that causes things to click for people. That's my answer.
So we really are popularizing in a way. And
well, I think you have to make your story as a storyteller relevant to people. You have to make them turn the page. You have to make them want to learn more. If you are boring them to death, or you're taking them down a rabbit hole that ends nowhere, or entering into a circular argument that goes round and round, any of us would lose interest. So that to me, that's our task.
so people are wondering where they can find this video of Alex McNeil dancing with his cat.
I don't know, but I think there's a bar cat in here that maybe Jonathan dances with from time to time. We could probably.
I'm wondering why my videos never make it out there. Here's Keir Cutler as one here. Here's what leads up to the question. Recently, historians have begun to look more at Elizabethan England as something akin to a modern police state, with spies, arrests, torture to protect Elizabeth from assassination. Some strats push back on this, insisting Shakespeare wrote without fear of arrest or torture, since all he had to do was please the master of the revels and no problem after that. They like to pretend the movie Shakespeare in Love is a documentary. Is there a need to push the dangers of being a playwright at the time, making the need for a frontman more likely? I'd say it's always good to add that context to it so people don't think. I think Stratfordians tend to think of Elizabethan England as like a Renaissance fair where people are like slapping their thighs and ho-ho-hoing and quaffing mead and things.
No, I think the most important thing about Keir's question are the words police state, and that is exactly what Elizabethan England and most other countries at the time, in Europe anyway, were like. I sometimes, if I'm talking to people who aren't familiar with the question at all, the closest analog we might have to Elizabethan England would be North Korea, where the ruler, first, it's a hereditary rulership there. The ruler is deified. Residents of North Korea are required to have a portrait of Kim Jong-il, is that his name, in their house or their apartment, and to keep it dust-free at all times. And there's limitations on haircuts for men and women and all kinds of petty things, not to mention censorship galore. And I really do think that's the closest analog. And for anybody to have dramatic freedom of any kind in a police state, it's pretty rare. And do they have a pass? Do they have some kind of pass to do this that other playwrights do not have? You betcha.
I've read this. There's a number of books about the beginning of the English Secret Service, and that it really had its start in the Elizabethan times when William Cecil Lord Burleigh. Really, the usual credit goes to Sir Francis Walsingham, but in truth, Walsingham worked for Cecil. And I've even pulled up a lot of the warrants, the money that was paid to Walsingham to run the Secret Service, which he did with an iron hand. But a lot of the money had to be approved first by the Lord Treasurer, who happens to be Lord Burleigh. But one of the reasons that England was successful in many ways, it's a small, impoverished country, is that Cecil kept, now I'll use the right analogy, the Iron Curtain on England, and that the Spanish, of course, they had their diplomats and their embassies, but they really couldn't penetrate what was going on in England. But William Cecil, with the excellent work of Walsingham and the many agents that they had, they could figure out what was going on in Spain and France and the Low Countries, and of course they had a great Italy, tremendous outreach that could penetrate what was going on in these other countries, but they couldn't understand what was going on in England. There's something called and I may be missing it, not pronouncing it quite right, the Fruger newsletters. They were a German family that tried to write newsworthy stuff about the goings on all over Europe. They were a very rich family at that time, and they never could really quite figure out what was going on in England. Much to the credit of Cecil and Wilson.
Yeah, they were a very large family, and they were merchants, I think, and so it was pretty much in their interest to do so. I mentioned earlier the Spanish ambassadors. I read a wonderful entry today from 1578, where the new Spanish ambassador comes in. There hadn't been no Spanish ambassador for the last 6 years, interestingly enough, since Despes got kicked out. But he writes Philip 2 weeks in, and he says there are 19 members of the Privy Council, but everything is run really by the Queen, Leicester, Walsingham, and Burleigh. And he says Walsingham is Leicester's shadow, and Leicester is the most powerful man in England. And I've said that several times in some talks, and I thought, there it is. And I hadn't seen it before. But he also starts talking about Leicester's nephew, Philip Sidney, potentially being married to the sister of William of Orange, thereby becoming the Lord of Holland and Zeeland. And that would be a way for the Spanish to gain control of Leicester. Interesting, huh? And so Leicester's spy network should not be underestimated. Burleigh had at least 12 spies trying to find Oxford when he disappeared in Italy, and no one could locate him. So spy states everywhere. Any letter that you wrote, as we previously said, was subject to being opened and read code everywhere. No one trusted anyone, and Elizabeth came down so hard on people who she felt were even making any inkling that she was not in complete control of the throne. And of course, you could say her grandfather took over the crown by right of conquest. I mean, he was got this right, great grandson of a bastard son of Edward III's third son. I think that's the way it went. I may have added an extra generation there, but the Tudors, their claim to the throne was really thin.
They were our east compared to Oxford and the Veres.
What just struck me as another analogy. I think we often use Elizabethan England was like some Iron Curtain country or something, but it also sounds like gangland warfare was going on in its own way too.
Leicester had a kind of a mafia running around. There's about it. His Spanish ambassador said Leicester's men control all the ports. He wrote that in 1578. That Leicester literally was in charge of all the ports.
Okay, let me continue with some of our comments from our guests here. Jens in Germany, I think, is suggesting this in relation to Bonner's question. The Fugger family from Augsburg I've visited
Yes,
the
he's in German, so
Bulgaria.
he would be.
Yeah, I know more.
The
You
head
know,
of
know about
he's
that.
the head of the family was probably the wealthiest person who's ever lived. He bought the crown of the Holy Roman Emperor for Charles V. So that may be who we're talking. Ron had a couple of comments and a question here. The myth of merry old England, ho, 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 was developed in the Victorian era to create out of the canon a national literature superior to other literature. Benny asks separately, would there be any letters in Latin, French, Italian, or Greek by Oxford that have been missed, do you think? Do you think they're out there somewhere?
Of course they are. Question is where, and or do they all close with the famous words, burn this letter? Or, right?
Actually, we have rather a large body of letters that Oxford wrote, though we know for sure that we have only 3 that he wrote when he was in Italy. And we know he wrote lots more because he references that he's written sacks of letters. But we have 77 letters extant that we know of. And that's a fairly good group of body of letters that. And of course that wonderful book. I know we've got a very knowledgeable people who are listening to us out the other tables in the tavern. That the wonderful book by William Plummer Fowler, Shakespeare Revealed in Oxford's Letters. That's an incredible piece of work. And if people don't happen to have it, we need to make it more readily available somehow.
I think it's out of print, Honor.
Okay. Here's one. Why are poems written from the view of women? Venus, Lucrece, the Phoenix, A Gentle Maid, Mother Nature, and Sonnet 126. I think that sort of goes to that whole thing of Shakespeare was strangely feminist in a way.
Yes, absolutely.
Elizabeth Winkler brings up.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, the English laws. I mean, for having a queen on the throne, the English laws were extraordinarily difficult for women. You're under control of your father, your brother, or your husband, unless you were lucky enough to be a widow and a rich one, in which case you may choose not to marry again, so that you can control your own life. Disobeying your parents was a sin. You marry who you're told to marry. And all of this caused a great deal of unhappiness. But I think that one of the great characteristics is the ability to slip inside somebody else and to feel the world as they feel the world. And he wasn't, I maintain he was the most extraordinary feminist of his time. And he wrote some of the greatest heroines of all time, right?
I'm going to keep moving along here just so we get through more on our Q&A coming through. Peregrine Bertie wrote a summary of his 3 months in Denmark, but I've yet to find it in its entirety online. Where can I go?
There's that history of the Bertie family, that the name of which is escaping. I bet somebody else knows what it is. And there might be in the index in the back some citations that might be helpful. But I couldn't tell you if it's in the British Library, where it is. But that history of the Bertie family is available online through archive.org.
Okay, I hope that helps. Tom, our friend Tom, hi, I miss you. Do you have a brief, concise answer for people who point to Heminges and Condell's first folio letter, which speaks of Shakespeare as a friend and fellow and of receiving plays from him? They're remembered as my fellows in the Stratford man's will. Don't these factors mean there is personal, albeit posthumous, testimony connecting the man from Stratford to the plays? In addition to people who claim to be his friends, they believed him to be the author. So I remember Ross Barber brought that up at the conference too, as sort of the key sticking point for us. And we need to come up with an answer for that, or how to address it. And I see that in the comment threads under YouTube videos, the usual Oxford people, that's the point they constantly go to.
Because that's their best.
Yeah, there's a point to it. So, in answer to that, I don't really, without going into the whole Ben Jonson wrote that and all that, do we have a shorter, snappier version of shooting that down, I guess?
Well, it's interesting that yes, there's a bequest to Hemmings and Condell in Shakespeare's will, but it's interlineated, which doesn't mean that it was added after his death. I don't want to give that impression at all. It looks to be genuine, but what's interesting to me is he didn't think of it right off the top of his head when he was planning the rest of his estate, in great detail. It looks like somebody had to remind him, what about this deal with the other actors down in London? Let's do something about that. If they were really his dear friends, I don't think that would be an interlineated bequest. Mm-hmm. So I would start with that.
Can I just add to make sure that people understand that Will of Stratford was not holding the pen that wrote his will? I just, when you say it was added after the fact, this is not an autograph will, where he sits down and he writes his will. It is done by law clerks who are writing it for him. And perhaps, he amended the will, and they are also the ones that put the interlineation in there, but it's not him personally doing it the way some people think that it is. And there's also a very good article by Matt Hutchinson that is available through the Shakespeare Oxford website that argues that the 6 signatures that you see are all signatures of law clerks signing on behalf of Will of Stratford. And Matt gives his reasons for that. And on whether you believe it or not, I really do encourage you to, if you can't do all of Matt's articles, there's also a shorter version of that, sort of a synopsis of that very long research article that Matt did, that actually I wrote the shorter version, which is why I'm aware of Matt's article.
That's probably the one I've read, and it's pretty stunning. One part that sticks out to me is comparing a lot of signatures. In Shakespeare's signature, and the W is that little dot. And he looked and found that's a scribe trait. It's not the way most people sign their signatures.
Yeah.
So, and I was like, oh my gosh.
For lawyers, I think the kicker in Matt's argument, and the one that really strikes me as an attorney, is how you close a document even today. As a lawyer, if you say witness are hands and seals, it means that all parties to the document can and will write their name and attach a seal, which can sometimes be a corporate seal, or it can just be, a mark that signifies, yes, this is that person's signature, which is also the form of the modern jurat for notaries, but that the documents that Will of Stratford signs only say sealed, which indicates that the people drafting the document, the scribes, knew that he was not putting his signature on the document. And you can attest a will later and say, yes, that's my will. And then the fact that you say that in front of witnesses and those witnesses sign, they make a will valid. And this is necessary in a society where the vast majority of people, particularly in the outside of the nobility, scholars and the clergy, were illiterate. So they need to be able to form wills, and yet they can't sign their name. So the law has other ways for them to authenticate that document as theirs. And Matt's paper says it's the very form of how, signed and sealed, no, just sealed. Signed and witnessed, no, just witnessed, that the scribes actually knew he wasn't signing. How could he?
So not? It's sort of certain words, the word it's signed is
language. It's magic language that you see as a lawyer to how that document was authenticated and accepted by the parties to the document. And that's a kind of a subtle little thing, but Matt brings it out, and it's, for me, that's the lock.
So the word signed,
actually,
referring to Shakespeare, the word signed is conspicuous by its absence.
That's what I think. Yeah.
I'm going to try this out on our lovely group that is kind enough to listen to us. I have a little different take on that. By the way, I love Matt's article. And yes, I had noticed that there are all these elements of secretary hand that are in these 6 scrawl signatures. But for one thing, you're looking with the 6 signatures being different. You're looking, and they're on legal documents. And even the will, the 3 pages of the will, one thing that I did prove, and I've had a lot of people sign on that they agree with me, is that the 3 pages of this will of Stratford came at 3 different time frames in his life. So you're looking at 3, and I've gone through that. I won't do that now. But the deal is I think he turned up at the deposition and he couldn't write his name, and everybody else could. He's at a deposition. There's more than one. The clerk's there to write it out. They have assistants, and he says, he thinks it's easy because he's got an ego. You can tell from there's a lot you can learn and pull out of this will when you really study it carefully. The man is shrewd. He's not dumb. He's just illiterate. He's just a country bumpkin. Sorry if somebody's getting mad at me now, but that is what he really is. And he's been successful in business. That's why he's living in the largest mansion home in Stratford on Avon. He's living well. He's doing fine. He can function as an illiterate person because 80% of the people in England were stone cold illiterate, of the men. 95% of women were. This is David Cressy has done those numbers, the Cambridge University historian, and most everybody uses that and agrees with that. But he turns up to this deposition and everybody else can write their name and he can't. And so he asks the clerk who's writing it out, show me how to write my name. And he gets a pen and he's got a few scraps and he practices a little bit. Now, that's why it's so scrawled. It's his first time to ever write his name in 1612. He buys the property within a year, and he's got different people. He thinks the way you write your name is somebody shows you how to do it, like a child. And he scrawls another way, but it's a different person showing him. And he still does not have what we would call a practiced hand, obviously. And then the next day, he's got another person, another assistant, somebody else there, and he does it a little. And be sure you put the dot inside the W. Oh, yeah. Wow, aren't I smart? And then the 3 different time frames in his life that he's signing on this will. And by the way, wills were rarely written. I know that the Stratfordians love to tell us that he went to a lawyer to do it. The lawyer did it. They want to blame lawyers for this crummy document. In fact, wills were rarely written by lawyers back then. It was a holdover from the medieval ages where wills were not regarded as legal documents in the sense that they are today. I promise you, Dorothy, I'm not trying to offend you. I promise you. They were regarded.
2 of us to offend. We got 2 lawyers now. We're going to run.
All right. Sorry. Oh my God, I'm going to get killed. But they were regarded as religious documents. It was a holdover from the medieval times when wills were first begun when they thought that the reason for a will was to give for that testator, will maker, to give their soul to God. And that's why the wills always begin with these words. So far as I know, in the name of God, Amen. Now, and they were generally written by clergy or clerks from the churches that in a town would be possibly the only people among the few of a small little town like Stratford who could write, because they had to keep records of births and baptisms rather, and burial records and records of marriages and what they had to do for the church. But at any rate, I think that you're looking at 6 different people, and I know Matt probably would like to kill me now, but because he did phenomenal, wonderful work with pulling together all of these signatures and doing all this comparison. And he's got a lot of fascinating information in that paper. But I believe what you're looking at are 6 different people who showed him how to write his name. Because why would a person who's going to show somebody how to write their name, but they're going to write it for them, why would they? And I don't think Matt answered that, or if he did, I missed it. Why would they want to write such a scrawled, terrible-looking signature? Are they going to say, well, I'm going to pretend that I'm writing for a country bumpkin who can't write his name? No, they write the name, I think, halfway decently. And present
They both
he does
sound,
have an answer. He has an answer. He does answer that. Yeah, he does. Yeah, it's
they
in there.
both sound plausible to me.
We got quite far away from Hemmings and Condell.
We did. Yeah,
detoured into
be
it.
more succinct.
Like I say, this isn't subject to like sound bites, really. It's and comment on Audley End, please. We can speak
Oddly, and
for.
in terms of Roger Strittmatter's,
I'm guessing it would mean that, but
there. Well, I think that Roger is onto something absolutely remarkable, and I don't think that we are going to steal Roger's thunder. I think we're going to hope that Roger will share that with us himself, and just leaving it a little mysteriously. I think it is an incredibly exciting topic.
For more information, go to the spring 2023 issue of the Shakespeare Oxford Newsletter, article Breaking News, De Vere Annotated Books from Audley End. No, I agree with Dorothea. There's an exciting thing for people who might not be familiar with it.
Yeah, very exciting.
A couple of books have turned up at an old estate is it in Essex? I think it is, that are heavily annotated. And they've just come to light within the last several years. And Roger is doing fantastic research to show that the chief annotator of one of those books is likely Oxford.
he gave little hints of it at the conference, and people's jaws were dropping, including mine, at some of what he's found. So, yeah. Here's a question. How much credence do you give to the Ostler-Heminges lawsuit that says the Shakespeare shareholder was dead in 1615?
That is actually Bonner's father who found that research.
I read that.
Actually, my mother, my dad wrote it up, but mother communicated with one of the finest historians in England. The man's name he's now forgotten, too bad, because he's one of the greatest of the archivists in Essex. He was at the Essex Record Office. His name was Professor Emerson, not Emerson, but Emerson. And mother had him do the transcription of it. So you can bet it's perfect. and then dad wrote it up. Actually, she had written a couple of articles, and he sort of combined them and sent them in to the De Vere Society newsletter in England, and they published it. And recently, Tom Woosnam pulled it out of the shadows, and it had a lot of mistakes in it that I don't know how it got there, but I know my dad didn't make them, and I'm quite sure my mother didn't make them either. So I retyped it. And then it has, of course, studied it, and it's really a very interesting document, because it means that in a year before the man from Stratford died, William Shakespeare is not there anymore, is gone.
He's already dead. Yeah, he was already dead.
And it's very strange.
Which
Maybe
throws up
that's
a
the
question
soundbite we should pull up whenever they talk about their friend and fellow. Maybe, but did you know that they're when they do that first folio thing, well, how do you explain it? You drop a new document. There's a document. Didn't you know that?
We found new documents. You don't have them, but we can find new documents. Well, it goes to what our friend Brian has talked about is, maybe we're conflating different William Shakespeares, and it was a common name. So maybe there's more confusion in all this than we think there is. Somebody says, do you think we'll ever find out what caused the death of Oxford? Any chance of that turning up, do you think?
I don't think so.
It's pretty clear that the family was pretty quiet about it. As I said, I think burn these papers or burn these letters, or no trace was probably his no trace except for all the traces, right? I think he left so many clues, so many clues. So I really feel like we're all like little birds picking up, cracker crumbs everywhere, and he's seeded it. And when you start to assemble the pieces of these scattered clues, as Mark Twain says, a Tyrannosaurus, arises. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to acknowledge John Beatty's leaving messages. He's doing this activity he tells us about in his comments sometimes about having signs on display in front of the Folger. It's an interesting approach. Brent Evans, I'd recommend Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy to get a sense of the precarious and capricious nature of Tudor England. I think they made a mini series of that too.
Fabulous.
Yep. Do you believe Oxford had collaborators even during the last 12 years of his life? If so, who do you think would have been the principal contributors?
During the last years of his life,
The last years.
I would answer absolutely not. I think, there's one master editor, and that is he. I think many of those works he had worked on for literally decades and decades, and he was taking the best of them and perfecting them and perfecting their language and making them just exquisitely beautiful. I'm not much of a collaborator person. There are others, other Oxfordians who are, which is not to say never, and it's not to say every single word was Oxford's, but I think as far as the canon that comes down, my feeling is there is less rather than more, but I would not say there is none, if that's not terribly confusing.
I'd respectfully disagree. I think he probably was open to collaborators, and I think his health may have been failing for quite a while. And also, Percy Allen wrote about this in one of his very perceptive books back in the early days of the Oxfordian movement, the ones that Jim Warren has reprinted. I can't remember which volume it's in, but Allen's got a good case that some of the plays that most of us find boring these days, he thinks were finished, were started by Oxford, and they were unfinished manuscripts that collaborators worked on probably in his latter years or after his death, because you had the Shakespeare authorship, you had the brand. They wanted to keep the brand name going.
Good, good theory. It's a great theory. Yeah, we're still friends, even though we disagree.
And we're lawyers.
And we're lawyers.
Anne asks, tell us again the name of the article.
I'll get it for you right here. I've got Jim Warren's index. The Slippery Slope of Shakespeare Signatures, volume 23 of the Oxfordian in 2021.
Gosh, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Alex, again for jumping in here.
Alex.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
It's been an honor.
Who's taking care of my bill? My bar bill.
Oh, well, I'll put it on your tab here and you can pay it later. So thank you, everybody. It's been a nice, I found this nice and relaxing, and I love the back and forth here. So
we'll see you next time. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye, everyone. Come back. Oh, I knew it. Somebody always forgets their keys. There you go. Well, it was nice having you. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. If you liked it, again, give us a like or a subscribe there at the tip jar at your table. And if you want to learn more all about this, go to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website. Just look them up and you'll find tons more information on everything Edward de Vere and Shakespeare. It's been great having you. Safe drive home. Take care.